In the heart of Southeast Asia, inside the golden palaces of Burma's Konbong dynasty, a kingdom was breathing its last. Its end wasn't just a simple story of imperial conquest. It was a tale of ambition, passion, and bloodshed, all swirling around one woman. She was the last queen of a powerful kingdom, a figure of immense power and even greater controversy. Her name is whispered in history, forever tied to a shocking night of brutality that wiped out her rivals and secured a throne. But in doing so, did she also seal her empire's fate? This is the story of Supayalat, the last queen of Burma. Her story is a tangled one, woven with threads of cruelty and surprising reform, of fierce love and unforgiving jealousy. To the British who would conquer her land, she was a monster, the perfect villain to justify an invasion. To later Burmese nationalists, she was a defiant symbol of resistance, a queen who never bowed. And in the popular imagination, she became the living proof of an old proverb: a woman can bring ruin to a kingdom. But was she really the architect of her kingdom's downfall? Or was she a victim of her time, a formidable leader fighting a losing battle against history? To understand the woman, we have to understand the world that made her, a world of opulent palaces, deadly court intrigue, and the ever-present shadow of a foreign empire closing in. Supayalat was born on December 13, 1859, right into the heart of Burmese royalty in Mandalay. She was a daughter of King Mindon Min, a respected ruler, but just one of many children. In the sprawling, complex world of the royal court, a princess's future was anything but certain. Her father, like those before him, had numerous queens, consorts, and a seemingly endless line of potential heirs. This environment was a gilded cage, beautiful on the outside, but simmering with constant, silent competition. The key to Supayalat's rise wasn't her father, but her mother, Sinbumishin, the queen of the Middle Palace. Sinbumishin was a woman of sharp intelligence and ruthless ambition. Having seen the chaos and bloodshed that usually came with royal successions, she was determined that her own daughters would come out on top. She groomed them not for quiet lives as royal wives, but for power. And Supayalat, her middle daughter, turned out to be her most eager and capable student. From a young age, Supayalat showed a fiery, unbreakable will. Stories, possibly exaggerated by her enemies, tell of a young princess with a cruel streak. What we know for sure is that she was sharp, observant, and refused to be a pawn in anyone else's game. She watched the intricate dance of power in the palace, learning who to trust, who to fear, and how to work the system from the inside. The world outside the palace was just as dangerous. The British Empire had already swallowed huge territories in the region. The First and Second Anglo-Burmese Wars had ended in humiliating defeats for Burma, costing them all of Lower Burma. The kingdom was now landlocked, its access to the sea controlled by the British. King Mindon had skillfully navigated this diplomatic minefield, keeping the British at bay with careful negotiations. But everyone knew this peace was fragile. The British lion was patient, but its appetite was insatiable. This looming threat only made the internal pressure worse. The question of who would succeed King Mindon wasn't just palace gossip. It was a matter of national survival. The kingdom needed a strong ruler. Sinbumishin was convinced that she, through her daughters and a hand-picked son-in-law, was the only one who could provide that strength. As Supayalat grew up, she shared her mother's belief. She didn't just want to be a queen, she wanted to rule, and she was willing to do whatever it took to make that happen. In 1878, the inevitable happened. King Mindon died. The fragile stability he had created died with him. The palace was thrown into a power vacuum, a chaotic scramble for the throne. Dozens of princes, all with some claim, saw their chance. It was in this crisis that Queen Sinbumishin made her move. Her plan was both audacious and cynical. She needed a king she could control. Passing over more powerful and experienced princes, she chose a quiet, bookish junior prince named Thibaw. Fresh from a stay in a Buddhist monastery, Thibaw was seen as gentle and pliable, the perfect puppet. With the help of powerful ministers, Sinbumishin skillfully maneuvered Thibaw onto the throne. To seal the deal, she offered him her eldest daughter, Supayaji, as his chief queen. This was the traditional way of doing things, a strategic marriage to bind the new king to her family. But Supayalat had other plans. She wasn't about to let her older, more reserved sister take the ultimate prize. During the royal wedding ceremony, in a stunning breach of protocol, Supayalat reportedly pushed her way to the front, making sure she was anointed queen right alongside her sister. From that moment, it was clear who really held the power. Supayaji was sidelined, and Supayalat, at just 19 years old, became the chief queen and the dominant force in the king's life. Her control over Thibaw was total. One of her first acts was to enforce monogamy. For centuries, Burmese kings kept large harems to cement political alliances. Supayalat would have none of it. She refused to let Thibaw take any other consorts, a radical break from tradition that shocked the court. It was a power move disguised as jealousy. By controlling the king's personal life, she controlled access to him, cutting off potential rivals. Later, when Thibaw did take a secret concubine who became pregnant, Supayalat's response was swift and brutal. Upon discovering the affair, she had the pregnant woman and her entire family executed. The message was clear: there was only one queen. While Thibaw was the official monarch, many historians agree that it was Supayalat who truly ruled. The young king was completely reliant on his fierce, intelligent, and ruthless wife. The stage was now set for the most infamous act of their reign, an event that would forever stain her name in blood. Getting the throne was one thing, keeping it was another. The court was a viper's nest. Despite Thibaw being king, dozens of his half-siblings remained imprisoned in the palace. Each was a potential figurehead for a rebellion. Sinbumishin and Supayalat knew their position was fragile. In February 1879, just months into the new reign, they decided to eliminate the threat for good. What followed was a calculated, horrific massacre over 3 days. An edict was issued, and soldiers entered the prisons holding the royal relatives. Between 80 and 100 members of the royal family were systematically killed. To avoid the taboo of spilling royal blood on the ground, victims were reportedly put in velvet sacks and bludgeoned to death. Some accounts claim the screams of the dying were drowned out by the noise of theatrical performances staged for the occasion. Men, women, and children were wiped out, ensuring no one was left to challenge Thibaw. The world was horrified. The British, in particular, used the event as proof of the barbarity of the Burmese court, a convenient excuse for their own ambitions. But inside the palace, the question of who gave the final order is still debated. Supayalat always denied her involvement. "I was a teenager at the time and too young to undertake such an inhuman act," she later claimed. She insisted the plot was hatched by her mother, Sinbumishin, and powerful ministers who saw it as a grim political necessity. Sinbumishin was certainly ruthless enough to orchestrate it. However, few believed Supayalat was completely innocent. Her fierce personality and her dominance over the king made her a prime suspect. One of her maids of honor was quoted as saying, "No one could stand against her when she was angry. It were better to face a tigress." Whether she gave the order, supported it, or just looked the other way, her name would be forever tied to the massacre. The Night of Blood had secured her husband's throne, but it had also forged her reputation. She was no longer just a queen. She was Supayalat, the Ruthless. With their rivals gone, Supayalat and Thibaw's reign began. For the next 7 years, from 1878 to 1885, Supayalat was the undisputed power behind the throne. While King Thibaw, a devout Buddhist, focused on religious matters, Supayalat ran the country. She controlled access to the king, made key appointments, and directed policy with a sharp, unforgiving hand. She famously clashed with ministers who wanted to limit the crown's absolute power. In one instance, she mocked the chief minister, Kinwan Mingyi, for his cautiousness by sending him a woman's sarong, a profound insult to his manhood. At the same time, she could be lavishly generous to her favorites, rewarding court performers with jewels from the royal treasury. Yet, to see her only as a cruel tyrant is to accept the colonial propaganda used to demonize her. The truth is more complex. Beneath the ruthlessness was a woman desperately trying to hold her kingdom together. Some historians now see her as a reformer. Her insistence on monogamy wasn't just jealousy. It was a radical social reform that broke the power of families who used royal marriages to gain influence. She also championed surprisingly progressive causes, founding schools specifically for girls at a time when female education was not a priority. Her actions, while often brutal, were part of a desperate struggle to preserve an absolute monarchy against both internal divisions and the immense pressure from the British. She was a product of an old world of violent power, but her challenges were modern. This contradiction would soon come to a head as the threat she had long feared finally arrived. While Supayalat consolidated her power, the world outside was closing in. The British Empire, having already taken Lower Burma, saw the independent kingdom of Upper Burma as a prize rich in teak, rubber, and rubies. British merchants complained about trade restrictions and pushed their government to take action. Geopolitics also played a huge role. The British were alarmed by the growing influence of their rivals, the French, in Southeast Asia. Thibault's court, likely at Supayalat's urging, began making diplomatic contact with France, hoping to forge an alliance. To the British, a French-aligned kingdom on their eastern border was unacceptable. The British government in India began treating the Burmese monarchy with open contempt. They effectively demoted the king of Burma to the status of a minor Indian prince in diplomatic affairs. They also gave refuge to princes who had escaped the 1879 massacre, using their stories of Thibault's cruelty as a pretext. The final trigger for war came from a commercial dispute. The Bombay-Burma Trading Corporation, a major British timber company, was fined by the Burmese government for underreporting its teak harvesting. The British government called the fine an attack on their interests and issued an ultimatum. Lord Dufferin, the Viceroy of India, sent a list of demands to King Thibault that were impossible to accept without surrendering all sovereignty. He demanded that a British official be placed in Mandalay with the power to veto Burma's foreign policy. It was a demand for total submission. Fiercely proud, and perhaps fatally underestimating the threat, Supayalat and Thibault's court refused. For the British, this was all the justification they needed. In November 1885, the order was given. The British invasion force marched on Mandalay. The Third Anglo-Burmese War had begun. The war was shockingly fast. The British forces, armed with modern weapons and transported by a fleet of river steamboats, faced a Burmese army that was poorly equipped and demoralized. The entire invasion lasted less than 2 weeks. As the British advanced almost unopposed on the capital, panic gripped the royal court. Supayalat, the queen who had ruled with such an iron fist, now faced a power she couldn't intimidate or execute. The kingdom she had fought so brutally to control was crumbling. On November 28, 1885, British troops entered Mandalay without a fight. The next day, the final humiliation took place. King Thibault, then 27, and Queen Supayalat, 26, were told they were being sent into exile. There are claims she was heavily pregnant at the time, though this is not definitively confirmed. The scene of their departure is one of the most tragic images in Myanmar's history. They were led from the palace through a gate reserved for funerals, placed in a common bullock cart, and paraded through their own capital. Witnesses described Thibault as broken, but Supayalat remained defiant. She never lost her composure and calmly asked a British soldier for a light for her cheroot, a small act of defiance in the face of total disaster. They were put aboard a steamboat named Thuriya, meaning the sun, and taken down the Irrawaddy River. The ship carried away not just a king and queen, but the end of 1,000 years of Burmese monarchy. The Golden Palace was now a barracks for British soldiers. The empire Supayalat's ambition had secured was lost. Her life as a queen was over. The royal family was taken across the Bay of Bengal to British India. Their final destination was Ratnagiri, a remote coastal town chosen specifically to keep the deposed king from becoming a symbol for rebellion. The contrast with their old life was stark. In Mandalay, they were semi-divine figures in a golden palace. In Ratnagiri, they were political prisoners under house arrest in a large but desolate mansion. Their movements were monitored and their mail was read. The financial strain was immense. They were forced to sell off priceless royal jewels for a fraction of their worth to local moneylenders. King Thibault, stripped of his kingdom, sank into a deep depression. He died of a heart attack in 1916 after 31 years in exile, never seeing his home again. Supayalat, ever the fighter, endured. She argued with the British authorities over every detail of their confinement. But the exile took a terrible toll on her family. Isolated from their culture, her daughters faced tragic futures, with one eloping with a low-status secretary, a scandal that was said to have contributed to the king's early death. The proud queen watched her dynasty crumble in a foreign land. When Thibault died, Supayalat fought to have his body returned to Burma for a royal funeral. The British refused. He was buried in a small tomb in Ratnagiri. For 3 more years, the widowed queen remained a prisoner, a relic of a lost kingdom. In 1919, after 34 years in exile, the British finally allowed Supayalat to return to Burma. She was now a 60-year-old widow who had outlived her husband and her kingdom. But the British still feared her. They barred her from ever returning to the royal capital of Mandalay, worried her presence might spark a nationalist rebellion. Instead, she was kept under house arrest in a bungalow in Rangoon, now Yangon. From her home, she had a view of the magnificent Shwedagon Pagoda. Though a prisoner, she maintained royal court protocol to the end. Visitors had to approach her on their stomachs as she sat on a raised platform. In these final years, her public image began to shift. The British propaganda had painted her as a bloodthirsty tyrant. But now, with the country under colonial rule, some Burmese began to see her differently. The new nationalist movement rallied around her. She became a living symbol of a lost, independent Burma, a queen who never accepted British rule and looked down on their influence. The colonial official Maurice Collis noted that in her last years, she became a symbol of the struggle for Burmese independence. Supayalat died of a heart attack on November 24, 1925, just before her 66th birthday. The British, recognizing her symbolic power, declared her funeral a national holiday. It was a grand affair, with a 30-gun salute. She was laid to rest in a royal-style tomb near the Shwedagon Pagoda, a monument that stands today. Far from the Mandalay Palace, she always considered home. So, was Queen Supayalat the ruthless monster of colonial legend? Or was she a tragic, formidable leader overwhelmed by history? The answer is as complex as the queen herself. There is no denying her ruthlessness. The palace massacre happened under her watch and secured her power through shocking brutality. Her pride and controlling nature likely gave the British the perfect moral excuse for their conquest. However, to blame her for the fall of an entire dynasty ignores the bigger picture. The British Empire's expansion was a relentless force. It's unlikely any ruler could have held out forever against their military and industrial might. Supayalat's legacy is one of deep contradiction. She was a reformer who pushed for female education and broke the tradition of royal polygamy. She was a patriot who fiercely resisted colonial power. And she was a tyrant whose reign began with the blood of her own family. She is remembered as both a cruel despot and a national symbol of defiance. Her story is a dark and fascinating chapter in history, a powerful reminder that the line between hero and villain is often drawn by whoever wins the war. She fought to secure a throne, but her greatest legacy came from losing it, becoming an unforgettable symbol of a nation's lost sovereignty.